Let's let the YouTube catch up here. So anyway, hi folks. Sorry for the slightly light delay. Light. Whoa. Literally like running into place so fast I can't even speak English. So I had a fun drive home. I got stuck behind two different accidents. One near my house, one near my work. None of which were on the freeway though, so I guess that's okay. Oh, man. Okay, I hope everybody's having a good Tuesday. Yeah, I said that weird on purpose. You heard me. So before we jump into topic, and obviously the thumbnail gives a little bit of that away, but yeah, stop rubbernecking. Actually, like, Steven, one of the things I hate the most is rubberneckers. It drives me crazy because it's just like nine times out of 10, everybody's okay. Just go about your business. Drive safe around them. Slow down a little bit to go around, but otherwise, you're fine. The Seattle area is the worst, man, because the rubbernecking is ridiculous. You will have, especially on the freeway, like, yeah, if it was a freeway accident, I'd still be stuck. I'd be trying to do this thing from my phone, and I don't have an anchor for it, so that'd get real interesting. Which is to say, would not be smart, right? I'd be like pulling over to the side, hoping I could do a stream on my phone. But like the rubbernecks for accidents in Seattle, and it cannot be an accident. It could just be like a just somebody getting pulled over. You will have like one side of the freeway completely stopped, but the incident, whatever it may be, is on the other side of the freeway. It's so dumb. Like, the Seattle area is the worst when it comes to that stuff. I swear. I'm sure it's terrible everywhere, but it just drives me nuts because for me, I'm like, okay, yeah, those are cop lights. Who cares? There's not 4 ambulances and several fire trucks trying to block it off so you can't see anything. Nobody's seriously injured. Let's go. Let's go. What you do, right? So anyway, let's do. Before I talk topic, I'll do a short update. I need to top the water off in this thing. I did not get to that when I wanted to. So, for the Master Aquatic Horticulturist program, I know I like giving updates when I can. Let's see. I've been talking with the dev. We had a big meeting this last Sunday for a little over an hour. As we kind of skipped a couple weeks between Easter holiday and some other stuff, not having like enough stuff, just giving more time to work. We have a lot of like the base design and layout done. We're actually at a part now where like laying out parts of the website can't go forward until the back end, like basically database service side is hooked up, because you got some of the like fun, dynamic, or at least cool to me, from a user perspective things, as far as like making it so you can see your stats at a glance and stuff like that, requires those database portions to hook up. So we're at this part now where it's like, we'll seemingly see no progress as far as visually speaking, but we're looking at probably, I would say 2 months before working prototype is done at this point. And then working prototype will get tested for probably 1 to 2 weeks with a few friends. And I've made some debates about whether or not I'm going to open that up to like members too, because I'm a crazy person. But regardless, we'll do some tests just to make sure that the system works the way I intend it to. It's easy. It doesn't need any major overhauls to make it so that people can understand it very simply. Also, it will give me time to make tutorial videos, because we're going to have some tutorials on how to do that stuff and embed those, so that people can literally just watch a quick video that'll show them how to do everything. And then it'll get rolling. So realistically, I would say conservative speaking, 3 months. And that assumes that we don't have any like really, really horrible things happen. But that's the timeline, which I think is pretty good. All things considered, I think that's a pretty good pace. I don't know. I mean, it's certainly slower than I wanted it to be originally, but hey, we're going to get it out there. That's what matters. So I want to talk the topic of this evening, which is bucket list fish. And this isn't necessarily me just listing purely. I will list the fish that I don't have that I want to keep. Don't get me wrong, that will happen. But this isn't purely like, these are just the fish that Bentley wants to keep. I kind of want to talk a little bit about like how these things can change for some of us in the hobby, or at least what my experience has been and what I see other people do. So one thing that I think is really common for a lot of folks who get into this hobby and get serious is they'll see like the rare fish or the expensive fish, and they will all of a sudden like gravitate toward that. That's the bucket list fish. And this can be stuff like your zebra plecos, the leopard frog pleco, certain rare rainbow fish, or maybe it's that like super hard to find species of cichlid, because it's a specific, like there's two different types of dove, for example, and I know that one is far more desired than the other, and it's really hard to get them. You basically have to wild catch them, and they're very, very hard to get a hold of. And this applies to pretty much anything, right? There's certain saltwater fish that are hard to get, or the more expensive things, right? So you can look at things like, for the people who are in countries where they can get them, arowana, the Asian arowana, of course, certain stingrays. You start talking these things that are very expensive to keep or to acquire, or they require certain things like a mabu puffer, right? A mabu puffer requires a very large glass box, right? So you can't just like keep it in a 40-gallon breeder. And for a while, like this is great. Owen McGuire in chat mentioned the spotted Congo puffer was his bucket list fish for a little while. And for a while, it was really hard to get them. You could only get them wild caught. And it's only really in the last couple of years that we've had people actively breeding them in the United States and making them more available. So you have some stuff like this. Sometimes it's a fish that just doesn't breed in a ton of numbers consistently. So my example here would be, and this is one of my bucket list fish, so we'll start with some of those. We'll mix them in here and there. That would be the Valifera molly, or the Yucatan sailfin molly that Greg Sage has. I just love that like big giant mohawk that they have. And maybe that's because I kept cockatiels as a kid, and my aunt had a cockatoo, and I love those birds. So maybe it's just kind of like my way in the fish hobby to keep those birds again. But I think they're super cool, and they're huge, right? You're talking about a molly, it's getting like rainbow fish sized. Really, really cool to me. But at the same time, like, there was this huge backlog for a long time with Greg over at Select Aquatics for trying to get those fish, and now he's kind of farmed out to two people that are really actively breeding them. So now for me, it's just like I need to have the right tank for them, because they need a bigger tank, right? And I can look at getting them. And so it's like one of those things where I've told myself, when I do my garage, one of the fish I'm going to have is the Valifera molly. I'm going to have the sailfin molly. I like that fish a lot. I think it's cool. It needs a big tank. I'll have room for a big tank. We're going, right? We've got some interesting lists of here so far for chat, and I want to go through a couple of them because I think they're cool. So like there's some different bucket list ideas, not necessarily a fish, and I like this idea. Stephen P's got a cool one, just doing a Melanitania biotype, or biotope, I think might be what he means. That's kind of cool. And Mike Kirkpatrick mentioning one thing I said, the red dovei, which is, that's the one I was trying to remember. I'm not a big cichlid guy. I just know one. And they're now becoming pretty prolific. That's good to know. Basically, somebody got a hold of some and has been breeding them, because they breed in very high numbers, right? They make lots and lots of babies. Mike Kinseth. Man, why do you always give me these ones that are so hard to pronounce? But the yellow white cloud. Very rare fish on the bucket list. Yeah, I can see that. I can see like rare fish. So for me, my quote rare fish at this point is the zebra pleco. And then second to that, not quite as rare, but still kind of tough to find. They're getting a little easier now, is the L397 pleco. And you'll notice, like for me, I'm a rainbow fish person, and my bucket list fish are non-rainbows, right? And part of that is just because I'm lucky enough that I have the connections in the rainbow side of things that I can kind of get whatever rainbows I want. I don't have those connections for other types of fish. So those are things that I really want to get a hold of, but it requires the right space and the right setup. So a lot of this relies on my grand like fish room overhaul, which is to say not having fish tanks in random rooms of my house and having a dedicated proper fish room. The other thing I think that can tend to happen for some of us is very similar to me, right? We get used to keeping very certain fish. Like almost all of our fish are loosely related. Like maybe you're a live bearer nerd, or you're a shell dweller nerd, you're an African cichlid nerd, and your bucket list fish starts to become that one weird oddity that's not that. You could look at people who started getting into the mud skippers, for example. That was super, super popular as a kind of a bucket list fish for a lot of people after, like, Zenzo got his, and then Jimmy got some, and a bunch of other people all kind of got into the mud skipper game, right? And they're a neat fish. A lot of these fish, like, I think you get rare fish, expensive fish, then you tend to get fish that have interesting personalities that need special setups. So, like, puffers, right? Puffers are very personable fish. They need a special setup. With the exception of maybe the Congo spotted puffer, all the other puffers kind of need a bigger tank or a tank designed to handle just them because they can be kind of aggressive, right? The same thing can be happen for a lot of our larger cichlids. You need kind of specialized setups for them. Dovi get absolutely monstrous. Your stingrays, stuff like that, they get huge. And then you also get the people who want like, oh, there's this one nano tetra that's really hard to find. It can only be wild caught this one time a year. It almost never ends up on a list, right? It goes down this like crazy list of things that tell you like, this is very hard to acquire. And the tank you require for them could be something where it's like, oh yeah, I need to have tons of tannins in it. I've got to get the pH dropped really low. I got to do this, right? You start looking at fish that become bucket list fish because they require very specialized setups. Joe Davis just mentioned a great one here in chat. The pipefish that was recently in the Aquarium Co-op's unboxing, they require a specialized tank, so you have to do lots of specialized things in order to properly keep them. I think this is another reason why like certain things become bucket lists, not necessarily because it's like I'm that kind of fish keeper, but more that here's that unique, interesting thing that is a little special, and maybe around my other fish nerd friends is that thing that makes you go, ooh, what's that thing? Or how did you get that? Or how do you keep that, right? It's that thing that gets us other fish nerds really, really interested. We dial in and we're so curious about that one tank because it's that unique, interesting thing. Or sometimes it's that very pretty thing, or it's that rare thing where it's like, oh my God, you have wild-caught Ultim Angels. Or you have, look at the color on those wild discus. I've never seen wild discus with that much color. You get some of these things, right, where you can go find some of the wild discus that are nearly as colorful as the breeds that we have cultivated over time, but they're extremely expensive to acquire. And they're extremely finicky fish. But once they settle in, usually they're pretty tough. It's interesting how certain fish we think of as like they require this really stringent thing in the wild actually can be more robust as a wild fish than some of the line-bred ones. Discus, I think, is a great example of that. Some other really, really cool things in here. So, Mike Stambaugh, what's up, buddy? The brilliant Katoomba Cyprichromis. That sounds pretty awesome. And then immediately follows with a rainbow fish, the Melanitania species from Cali Jacora. Very, very cool fish. Not super high on my personal list, but it's still really cool. I think it's one of those ones where there's so many of the recent Melanitania Cali X that all look kind of similar. They're usually some form of like orange fish with lightly almost purplish, how dark their finish becomes. There's little things like that. There's a ton of them that are all really similar. For example, there's the Sisui, the Calimoisi, and the Clasioensis all have actually really similar coloration, but there's like, you have to be a real nerd to understand the differences in each of them when they're fully colored adults. It's kind of funny like that. I know that for a friend of mine who I have spoken to really recently, he got completely out of freshwater. He used to be all in, like, had a Jardini arowana and kept stingrays and kept all this, like, really expensive, pain in the butt stuff, and went to saltwater because he wanted to do certain corals. And we're talking rare, super expensive corals, the kind where it's like, yeah, there's this coral chunk that's like this big. It'll be $700. Like, what? Here's another one. Owen McGuire, betta macrostoma. There's a lot of people that want certain bettas. The macrostoma definitely is a hard one to get. A fish that has been listed in chat a couple times, like I've mentioned this. I want Radnocentris. A specific Radnocentris that I want is the Tiwa Creek. So, like, one of the rainbows I actually want is that Radnocentris, right? Which is it's a rainbow. It's one of the few rainbows that's on my, like, I need to have this fish, preferably very soon list. And there's also tons of fish that get on people's list because they need to be protected. They need to be kept for conservation purposes because their wild habitats are getting destroyed. Chris Tapp is mentioning there's a lot of bettas in that perspective. Also, this was mentioned in chat. There's tons of goodeids and some of the live bearers that are at some serious risk because their wild habitats just are not able to survive with the way that a lot of these countries require some of the people that live in those areas to do certain things to survive correctly. So you get a lot of fish that are interesting. So, like, tons of the cool goodeids are incredibly rare. You have other fish we literally can't keep that become a bucket list fish because people are like, oh man, if you could ever get some of those out of their habitat and they're protected, that'd be so cool. For me, I think about, like, the devil's hole pupfish. It's like actual population is like 500 fish or something. It's really tiny, and they live in this, like, extremely remote, unique place in the world. It's the only place they exist. And it's one of those things where you just look at them and you're like, I wonder what it would be like if somebody could keep those in captivity to try and breed more of them to survive, right? Man, there are some... That is a name. So, Mickey M just put a killifish species that, like, I'm not even going to try to pronounce because I know that I will butcher that thing horrendously. But this is another great example. There's lots of, like, the annual killifish and stuff that are kind of difficult to reliably breed that become bucket list fish for certain people because there's a kind of a difficulty or an interest in, like, I know I can breed that fish. It's a challenge that interests me. This is kind of another way that things become a bucket list, is the way that they're a challenge, whether it's just how to keep them or how to breed them, or maybe some people, no one's ever bred this fish in captivity. I want to figure out how to do it. There are plenty of people who have taken that route. They're far more dedicated than I am. I don't want something that's that difficult to breed, but there's lots of things that become a bucket list. So let me go over, like, the last couple of my personal bucket lists. So I mentioned the Radnocentris. I mentioned the two plecos that I want, the Zebra and the L397. I mentioned the Volifera Molly. The last one I've shown you guys once before, and that is another fish from Luke Roebuck before he passed, which was his bicolor magenta guppies, and I've not been able to find them. I've been looking as long as I looked for the blue Hawaiian Moscows, and then kept looking afterward. To be fair, I stopped looking about a year ago just because a little bit more than a year ago. I've been so busy at work that it's been really tough, but yeah, that's like the kind of the last major I need this. Now, there's several other fish I really like, don't get me wrong. Lots of them tend to be rainbow fish, but there's a lot of stuff I would like to keep. A fish that I think is really cool, but I'm not enough of a pleco nerd to, like, chase them, would be the snow white bristlenose. That's pretty cool. Somebody mentioned they got the snow white Corydora. That's pretty awesome. I haven't even seen those. I've seen pictures, but I've never seen them in person. The one that I would probably want to do a Cory's, there is actually a Cory that I really like. I like the Equus Cory. Probably not the one I would try to buy right away to breed, just because I'm going to leave that to people that are far better than I am. But it's a fish I want to eventually keep. Kind of like how I love the black and orange, both versions of the Venezuelan Corys. I love those a lot. I think those are cool fish. Those are other ones that like I would want to keep and would kind of get onto my bucket list. But for me, my biggest thing is I have more like a bucket list tank in my head, and that's probably like the greatest achievement is that what I want to do is have a very large tank. We're talking like 1,000 gallons plus. And you know, we're playing the pipe dream here. We're playing, remember that, how I used to talk about that eccentric millionaire list? This is on that thing, right? And I know, yeah, you could do it in plywood, and it doesn't cost quite as much, and da-da-da-da-da. Costs a lot more now than it used to, let me tell you. Human malware has been absolutely horrible for that. But what I want to do is have a very large school of one species of rainbow, a smaller rainbow. So the two that what the heck is going on? Okay, come back to live YouTube. You can do it. Trying to fix this stuff. Okay. It looks like it has returned to normal. What a thing. So, anyway. Woo, boy. Welcome back. So anyway, yeah, we'll conclude our bucket list fish talk with that because the mighty YouTube has spoken apparently. Hillbilly Aquatics, thank you so much for the super chat. You weren't forgotten, I promise. But apparently it's right when good old Papa YouTube decided to like slap me with the "your stream's not going to work" button. For those that, yeah. If you have questions at Bentley Pasco, makes it super easy for me to see them. And if for some reason I do not get to your delightful question, my email's in chat. That's bentley.pasco@gmail.com. You're welcome to email me. Typically takes me between 2 and 3 days to respond to folks. Please, 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 please send an email. Don't message me on other social media platforms because one, I ignore half of them. Mostly because I'm just too busy. I'll see it, I'll dismiss it, and then I'll forget it's there and never go back until like 3 months later. I've seen that in one particular one. And then I felt horrible when that happened, but email I really pay attention to, and it's really obvious to tell when I haven't responded to something because doesn't have the response there attached to it, right? So, yeah. Yeah, apparently a large tank of Tawa, YouTube is like, no, never, ever. Oh, man. Yeah, and there might be some delays with this happening, so hopefully everything fixes itself. Hopefully audio's not too horrible, but yeah. So we'll slam into questions. Fisher Aquatics. Do you know if I could/should use an egg tumbler for zebra daimyo eggs? I would not, because they're pretty fragile when they hatch. A lot of the small egg scatters are like that. Usually tumblers, we use the things that have a pretty sizable yolk sac attached to them. Corys are okay, plecos are okay. You could, in theory, do a slight flow, but typically what you want to do is put them in something that has light flow to it, like a very easygoing sponge, and leave them on their own. And make sure you have lots of microfoods for them to grow up on. This can be things like infusoria cultures. You could have microworms, vinegar eels. Oh my goodness. Don't do this to me again, YouTube. I swear. I'm watching you. Don't you do that loading animation at me. Yeah, so I would not use an egg tumbler on those, but there are certain fish where you definitely want them. Definitely, definitely. Redfish, bluefish. My buddy Jason in chat. I prefer to write my question down on parchment with a quill and tie it to a flaming arrow, which I fire into the quarter panel of moving vehicles. You better not shoot that into my moving vehicle. I'll get pretty angry about that. We might have words. Oh, man. And I think I had some questions earlier. I'm going to scroll up a touch, but again, at Bentley Pasco, trying to answer as many as I can. Dan Connor 1,000. Woo, buddy. Yeah, if I seriously do like a big tank like that, it'll probably be a plywood, basically pond that's sitting on the floor of my garage. I have the room to do it. It's just whether that's what I want. It's probably more efficient to do lots of like 40-gallon breeders or something like that. But, it's hard to ignore the allure of one giant tank. It's just whether or not my smart sense will overtake my like urge to do something really dumb. Because if you have problems with that big tank, it can cause all sorts of problems. Let me make sure. I thought there was like a question really early on, and I want to try and grab it. But maybe it was just some ads of people being like, hey, man, just, don't die in traffic. Oh, yeah, Joe Davis. This is the one I remember. Any thoughts on the pseudomcgill species? Well, they're rainbow fish. So me personally, I don't keep pseudomcgills. And the part of the reason why I do that is I have such an affection for the big boys. So like the Melanotania, the Glossolepis, the Chalatherinas, that I don't have room to also keep the pseudomcgills. Because you really can't keep them together because the big rainbow fish will bully the pseudomcgills in the sense of they're much bigger, they're much more boisterous, they'll get the food faster, and the pseudomcgills will struggle to eat. Yes, there are cases where you can mix them, but it's just not smart. The one that I like the most is actually not pure freshwater. It's brackish water, almost binging on salt water. It likes its salinity so high. And that is the Cyanodorsalis, which is a really, really cool fish. It's got some yellow finnage. It's got a big bright blue streak down its body. Really, really cool pseudomcgill. Gary Lang breeds them by, like, I swear, the millions. But because they're brackish, like, not a lot of people keep them. But it's a really, really cool fish. I honestly think it's probably the prettiest of all the pseudomcgills. Just, again, it's brackish, so not as many people keep that fish. And kind of follow up, Joe. We talk about bucket list fish. However, you need a room. What would be the ideal room be to house said bucket list fish? Well, I think typically you want this like in the Midwest, you use a basement. For us in the Northwest, we typically like convert our garages, or we'll build if we have like a side building in the back or something like that. There's a Mike the fish tank barn, literally converted a barn into his fish room. I think it's all about like understanding your space and using your space efficiently, because you want to make sure that you don't have too much moisture. So you need some kind of dehumidifier or ventilation. You want to keep the temperature. You want to heat the room, not individual tanks. Some people do heat individual tanks, and kudos to them. I just don't want that power bill. I think it's way cheaper to just heat the room. But you have more control if you heat each individual tank, and you do it with like temperature controllers and stuff like that. It's a lot more expensive, but you can do it. And then it just depends on the fish you're trying to keep. If you only want to keep like cool water gadeids and like rosy barbs and all these things that can sit at room temperature, you basically don't need to do too much special other than make sure you handle humidity and keep the room from getting too warm because of that dehumidifier or whatever's handling your humidity for you. But you have, in cool water, much less evaporation, so you don't have as much humidity hitting the air temperature, right? Because it's similar temperature. It's only usually when we heat that water that we get a lot of evaporation. You will get some from water movement, of course, but not as much. So it's kind of understanding the fish you want to keep, and then what it requires to do that efficiently. If you need enough to need a room. For some people, they only need one tank. There's one fish they want to keep. It can be done in a simple like 40-gallon breeder or a 20 long or whatever. I know plenty of people who like the only thing they got into fish for was to keep shell dwellers. They wanted one tank of shell dwellers. That's it. And they're happy. And kudos to them. The people who have that much control and just like, one fish is all I need. Life is perfect. I envy them at times because it's like, man, you must have like the most nice shell dweller tank known to man because you've only got one tank to worry about. It's the only thing you care about. It's the one thing that makes you happy. That thing must be like immaculate. Some idiot like me who's like trying to keep 20 tanks and working like a stupid amount and like, I'm keeping up with them just enough. Just that's all I can do. I can keep up. Courtney, I have been looking for Twin Star Light for my standard 20 long. I've been trying to figure out if one would fit, etc. Any idea? I think there is one that fits the 20 long. Not perfectly, like it's slightly shorter, but you can get it to hang above. You don't use the risers, if I remember correctly. Although I've seen a Twin Star sit on a 33 long, so there's got to be one that will fit because it's a 30-inch tank, right? So there's got to be something that fits it. I just don't know. I'm not a big fan of Twin Star personally, and part of that is just because I think it's an overcosted light for what it is. I think there are better lights for that same amount of money than the Twin Star, but that's personal opinion. I've had friends that had Twin Stars and they love them to death, and then I look at them and I'm like, eh. But I think that's a part of me that like, if I'm going to spend a lot of money, I'm going to go all the way. And I'm going to look at something really crazy like the Chihiros or the UNS Titan or the ADA Solar RGB or like the really nice sets of Kessels, right? Or I'm going to go under that and get lots of capability for far less money and look at something like the Fluval, where I get lots of features that I can easily control. It's all built for US-sized tanks, so it's very simple. I have like two grounds. If I'm going to spend a bunch of money, I'm going to go all out. If I'm not going to spend that much money, but I'm still going to spend a reasonable amount of money, I usually want a really nice, robust feature set. And Twin Star the lights I've experienced do not have that. They're like on-off. And for me, I'm not spending that much money on on-off. I want something that does some stuff and has some control. Because few things would make me less happy with a light than being like, I spent $300 on this light that I can only turn on and off. Now, it might be crazy powerful, like the UNS Titan. That's all the UNS Titan does. It's on-off, right? But it's insanely powerful. The color rendition is amazing. Like, I have a UNS Titan downstairs, and I've been offered a second one, which then I could do one big tank on two UNS Titans, and that'd be pretty slick. I've seen the color rendition of my rainbows on that light, and man, it is so different than, like, most of the other LEDs, because there's just all that shimmer that I see in sunlight, I can see on a UNS Titan. And it's basically like having a portable sun. And in that case, that's where I can justify spending the ludicrous amount of money that those lights cost for how little coverage they have, right? They're a 2 foot by 2 foot square per light. They're $500 per light. So on a 5 foot tank, I can cheat a little and only use 2 instead of needing like 3 for a 6 foot. But it's still $1,000 worth of lighting when I can do the same, like I can grow plants well enough and get good light off of one $200 flu ball. So, I weigh these two options and I gotta really like that fish and really want that color difference to go that hardcore, right? But some people like the really nice lighting, and in those regards, then they're probably fans of Twin Star and ONF, right? Why? I can understand if you're like have you ever kept pea puffers? Nope. He's so happy. He's such a doofy little boy. Even for me, it's one of those things where, like, I don't want to pay Comcast more money to upgrade. Slightly more than that. So smaller snails, if you can get. Just keep in mind, they're an aggressive fish. They Stephen P. Are vinegar eels as time-consuming as baby brine? Yes, no. No, in the sense that once you set the culture up, you literally have to just set it and forget it for like a month, and then it's okay. Harvesting it is kind of fast. There's like 2 ways to harvest them. You have to wait a month for the culture to wine bottles worth of vinegar eels in habit of brine shrimp. They're not as bad as a lot of people make them out to be. And like speed up. Man, I keep seeing some buffering stuff, and it makes me so paranoid. Hopefully everything's coming through clean for you guys. Man. Mickey, yeah, those things are crazy, but I've heard they're, like, really hard to keep, and they're super aggressive. They have this, like, interesting dance. I watched this video out in the wild, just playing with it. I know it's a lot more expensive than that particular so hopefully this before. This is driving me nuts, because you